Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling a real brain teaser. How does your focus, whether you're savoring some complex flavor or, locked onto a tiny visual detail, how does that tap into the very heart of your awareness?
Exactly.
Get ready to have your understanding of your own senses maybe flipped on its head a bit.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. We're diving into a really interesting new study that uncovers this surprising unity in how our brains manage sensory information, especially when we're really paying attention.
Okay.
Our guide here is a report from Neuroscience News, and it's covering a pretty compelling Yale-led study just published in Neuroimage.
Yale led. Okay. And the central puzzle piece we're looking at.
Well, it turns out that it doesn't matter if you're intensely focused on seeing or hearing or tasting or even touching something.
Mm-hmm.
The act of sharp attention, that real focus, seems to activate the same fundamental brain regions deep inside.
The same ones. Okay. So how does this fit with what we, already thought we knew?
Right. Well, for a long time, the prevailing idea in brain science was that our different senses, sight, sound, touch, taste, they each had their own sort of dedicated processing centers, mostly in brain's outer layer, the cortex.
Right, like specialized departments.
Exactly. Specialized departments, each handling its own type of information. And it made intuitive sense, didn't it? Because our experience of, say, seeing versus hearing feels so distinct.
Totally. Your eyes have the visual cortex, ears the auditory cortex. Seems like separate channels for separate inputs. But this new study, it asked a really intriguing question then. Could these seemingly independent sensory streams actually, converge deeper down, especially when our attention is laser focused?
Oh, I see. That's what the researchers were getting at. They were investigating whether multiple senses might use the same underlying alertness and attention systems, the ones located beneath the cortex.
Okay, the subcortical ones.
Yeah, these subcortical arousal networks. You can almost imagine them as the brain's fundamental, energy and communication infrastructure. The bits that keep the higher level processing alert and, well, online.
Right.
And crucially, they wanted to see how shifts in our focus actually affected these networks across all these different senses.
So how do you even begin to unravel something like that? Sounds complex, like trying to trace one thread in a giant tapestry.
It is complex, but they had a clever approach using existing data. They did this large-scale analysis of fMRI data.
Okay, fMRI, brain scans showing activity.
Right, tracking blood flow. More active region, more blood flow, which the fMRI picks up, so it gives you a map of neural activity. And they looked at data from over 1,500 healthy adults.
Wow, that many.
Yeah, a lot. And these people were doing 11 different tasks, engaging sight, hearing, taste, and touch. So by analyzing this really rich data set, they could hunt for common patterns of brain activity across all these diverse sensory experiences.
Okay, so they had this mountain of brain scans. What were the first clues they found?
Well, the initial key finding kind of confirmed part of their thinking. Sensory information, doesn't matter where it came from, visual, auditory, whatever it does, tap into shared systems located beneath the cortex.
Okay, so there is shared machinery down there.
Definitely suggests a more integrated way our brain processes the world than maybe a purely compartmentalized view would suggest.
Interesting. So there's this underlying common ground. But I think the report mentioned a second discovery that was even more of a surprise, the really big one.
Absolutely. And here's where it gets really, really interesting. The researchers discovered that when the study participants were deeply engaged in tasks that demanded these sharp, sudden shifts in attention, that moment your focus just snaps to something new.
Right, that redirection.
Yes, all that sensory input, whether it's a flash of light or a change in sound, it stimulated activity in the exact same two deep brain regions.
The exact same two. Which ones?
The midbrain reticular formation and the central thalamus.
The midbrain reticular formation and the central thalamus. Okay, those sound critical. What are their main jobs in the brain?
Oh, they're absolutely vital. These regions are known to be just fundamental for regulating our level of alertness, our ability to concentrate, our attention, and even our overall state of awareness. Essentially, the core building blocks of consciousness itself.
Wow.
You could sort of think of the midbrain reticular formation as maybe a general alarm system for the brain.
Okay.
And the central thalamus acts more like a key relay station, directing attention where it needs to go.
So it wasn't just any sensory information flooding the brain, but specifically those moments when attention was actively engaged and redirecting.
Yeah.
That's when these deep regions really lit up.
Exactly that. The tasks were specifically designed to require these rapid changes in focus. That dynamic shifting of attention seemed to be the crucial trigger for activating these central brain hubs across all the senses they tested.
That's a real aha moment, isn't it?
It really is.
I can just picture the researchers seeing that pattern emerge. The lead author, Aya Khalaf, I think she had a quote about how unexpected this was.
Yes, she did. She mentioned that, while they anticipated seeing activity in shared networks, when we saw all the senses light up the same central brain regions while a test subject was focusing, it was really astonishing.
Astonishing.
It truly highlights just how surprising this convergence was.
Astonishing is definitely the word. So what are the bigger implications here? Why is this discovery so significant for how we understand the brain, day to day or even in disease?
Well, the ramifications are actually quite wide-ranging. For one, it gives us a more profound understanding of disorders of consciousness, things like coma or epilepsy.
Oh, so?
Well, if these central brain regions are so fundamentally important for awareness, and we now see they're activated by focused attention across all our senses, then understanding how they function, or maybe malfunction, in these conditions becomes even more critical.
Right. It points to a potential common pathway. And it's not just about these extreme states, is it? The report also mentioned conditions affecting attention more broadly, like ADHD.
Precisely, yeah. Given that this study really underscores the fundamental role of these brain regions in attention and focus, it could offer fresh perspectives on conditions like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, where difficulties with maintaining focus are a primary characteristic.
Okay.
This new understanding could potentially pave the way for more targeted and hopefully more effective interventions down the line.
Interventions like, what are we talking about? Better medications, or maybe even those brain stimulation techniques.
Exactly. Identifying these specific neural networks as such key players could really enable the development of medications or perhaps brain stimulation approaches that directly target these areas. The goal would be to improve attention and overall arousal regulation.
That offers a really hopeful outlook, actually. The senior author, Hal Blumenfeld, he also shared his thoughts on the importance of this research.
He did. He emphasized that this study represents a, quote, step forward in our understanding of awareness and consciousness. And he also stressed that it provides crucial insights into just the normal, everyday functioning of the brain, which, of course, is essential for understanding what happens when things go wrong.
Right. You need the baseline.
You need the baseline.
Yeah.
And, thinking about it, if this is a fundamental mechanism of awareness, could disruptions in this kind of cross-sensory activation maybe help explain why some people, perhaps in conditions like autism spectrum disorder, struggle to filter out irrelevant sensory information?
Oh, interesting angle.
It raises some fascinating questions about that interplay between sensory processing and attention, for sure.
And just so we're crystal clear, this unified response across all these different senses during focused attention, specifically lighting up these deep brain regions, that's the brand new observation here, right?
That's the core novelty,
Yeah.
I mean, we knew these regions were involved in consciousness and attention generally,
Sure.
but witnessing this consistent activation across such a diverse range of sensory inputs, specifically during those focused attention shifts, that's a significant and previously unobserved phenomenon.
Got it. Okay. And the research, it received funding from the National Institutes of Health, NIH.
That's right, NIH funding, which is important to note.
And who else was involved? Any collaborators mentioned?
Yeah, the report mentions Eric Lopez from Yale, who was actually an undergraduate researcher in Dr. Blumenfeld's lab at the time.
Oh, cool.
As well as colleagues from Harvard Medical School. So yeah, a nice example of collaborative research bringing together different groups.
Definitely. So we've focused a lot on the midbrain reticular formation and the central thalamus. But the study abstract also mentioned some other subcortical areas, ones that showed less consistent activation.
Yes, good point. The abstract indicated they also observed less consistent but still present early transient increases in activity in a few other places.
Like where?
The pons, the hypothalamus, the basal forebrain, and the basal ganglia. These also showed some increased activity across the senses during those attention shifts.
Okay.
So it suggests, a broader network is likely at play, but the midbrain reticular formation and central thalamus seem to be the most consistently and strongly engaged hubs in this specific process.
Right, the main players. So if we kind of zoom out now and look at the big picture, It seems that pinpointing these networks isn't just, an academic exercise.
Not at all.
It has real implications for understanding fundamental brain functions, attention, consciousness, and potentially developing new ways to help people where those things are affected.
Exactly. It really opens up exciting possibilities for what's called therapeutic neuromodulation.
Which means?
Directly and precisely targeting these subcortical areas, maybe with stimulation or other techniques, to influence attention and states of consciousness.
Fascinating. Okay, we've really dug deep into this study. If you had to boil it down, what's the most important takeaway you'd want our listeners to remember from this?
I think the key insight is this. Our senses, which we often experience as pretty independent, right? They're actually much more interconnected at a really foundational level. When it comes to the brain processes that underpin focus and consciousness than we previously realized, that moment of really locking in your attention pop seems to trigger this shared response deep within the brain. Doesn't matter if you're focusing on a sight, a sound, a taste, or a touch.
That is truly mind-bending. Makes you look at your own senses in a whole new light.
It does.
Okay, so on that note, here's something to really mull over. Given this shared neural network for focused attention across all senses, could this offer, I don't know, insights into something like synesthesia, where, hearing a sound triggers seeing a color?
Ooh, interesting thought.
Or think about how powerful multisensory experiences can be for enhancing memory or learning. Is this fundamental interconnectedness playing a role there? And finally, the study puts so much emphasis on the shift in attention being the crucial trigger.
Right, the shift.
What does it tell us that it's not just sustained focus, but that act of reorienting our awareness that's so key to activating these deep brain hubs? It seems the very act of our attention being caught by something is deeply wired into our core awareness. Lots to think about there.
Indeed. Maybe think about your own experiences with attention. Have you ever noticed how really focusing on one sense, say listening intently, can sometimes heighten your awareness of something else entirely? Perhaps this underlying shared network is what's at work there. Definitely food for thought. Thanks for joining us on this Deep Dive.